Who's got two of these on today? Oh, good. Just making sure. These are very good things to have, predominantly because they cover up these. Feet stink. Ever notice that? You ever you're like, what's that smell? Oh, that's my feet. I need to cover them up. Shoes, the biggest maker, yes, I have stinky feet, but yeah, you can laugh all you want to, but you cover yours up as well. Nike dominates the world of making shoes. They pretty much, if you stack all other shoes together, it might equal Nike. I mean, they dominate. But there's several different reasons for that, but they were the first ones to come out with these waffle soles to them that were actually helped created by a waffle iron. Before that, if you go back, a major invention were shoelaces. But nowadays, we have options and options and options and options of shoes. Big shoes, little shoes, colorful shoes, all kinds of shoes. Some of them, you would look at them and you might not even know that they were shoes, but they are. You go back a few hundred years, and your option of shoes were not very many. You wore sandals. So I have a picture of what your feet might look like if you wore sandals versus all these many wonderful, colorful apparel on the other side. If you go to most third world countries, you'll see people walking around with no shoes on. And they're dirty. And I know you guys have chiggers here. And growing up in Africa, there were these things that were kind of a cousin of chiggers, I think, but they were like more devilish. And they would burrow under your toenails, and you had to dig them out with a needle. Under your toenail, it's very, very sensitive. But you didn't wear shoes, and you would get these things in there, and you have to dig them out. It's very painful. And then we have all these kind of things that at the store that you spray on your feet or you put on your feet to cover up smell or bunions or all the crooked things. You get toenail polish to try and make them look pretty, which is just weird to me. However, feet happen to be very useful objects. I mean, you use them all the time, right? You wake up in the morning and the first thing you do when you stand up is put your feet on the floor. Yeah, that's the first thing you use every day. Now, if you were to not have shoes, you would be walking around in everything that you find on the ground, and you find all kinds of nasty stuff on the ground. But because of our shoes, we don't have to worry about it because we get home and we just take them off. The chapters that we're reading in John today, or that we're talking about in John today, had not one but two examples of feet being washed. And that's kind of a foreign idea to ourselves now. I mean, most of us, we probably just wash our feet when we take a bath or a shower. We don't really have a place to wash our feet when you come into a house nowadays because we don't need it because we have our shoes that cover them up. Back in Jesus' day, you didn't have that. And so you walked around in everything that was on the ground. And so you imagine a bunch of cows or sheep go through town, and you know what gets left in the road. You don't drive around in cars, you walk around in this. And, they don't really have a big sewer system, and so you can imagine what you find on the road. Now you couple that with it. At the same time, in Jesus' time, they had tables that were a little bit different than ours. You would recline at the table. You might sit down on the floor while you're at the table, which brings you into closer contact with what? Your feet. Now imagine how that smells when your feet are 3 feet away from you, or somebody else's feet are even closer to you than that as you're eating your dinner. Aren't you all getting hungry right now? There's a good reason why these two accounts of feet washing are included in the Scriptures. because at that time, feet washing was a very important practice. So the first one that we're going to come to is in John chapter 12. Go ahead and turn there. John chapter 12. And we're going to read about a lady named Mary anointing Jesus' feet. Before we read it, I want to talk to you a little bit about relationships. I do a lot of counseling, and in counseling, most of the time it involves relationships or relationships colliding together. And I like to talk about there's two aspects of the relationship, or two ways that a relationship needs to grow. One, you have the heartfelt feeling side of a relationship. And so this has your emotions, it has love, it's based on things like fun or excitement, a lot of feelings in there. The other part of a relationship that a serious relationship needs to have is the head side, a devotion side. Because in your mind, you make a commitment, you make a decision, you make a choice. The feeling side, once those feelings leave, if you don't have the other side, then the relationship ends. You know, if the feeling side is all on fun, once the fun is gone, well, then there's no reason to continue. Or once the happiness is gone, well, then I'm going to go find happiness somewhere else. So you need both sides. You need the feeling, emotional side, but you also need the head thinking, devotion side. Because there will be a time when the relationship is not easy or happy and fun. You have to rely on that decision point. And in this account here, I think it's pretty clear what kind of relationship Mary has with Jesus. So let's read the first 8 verses. John chapter 12, verse 1. 6 days before the Passover, Jesus therefore came to Bethany, where Lazarus was, whom Jesus had raised from the dead, and so they gave a dinner for him there. Martha served, and Lazarus was one of those reclining with him at the table. Mary therefore took a pound of expensive ointment made from pure nard, and anointed the feet of Jesus, and wiped his feet with her hair. The house was filled with the fragrance of the perfume. But Judas Iscariot, one of his disciples, he whom was about to betray him, said, "Why was this anointment not sold for 300 denarii and given to the poor?" But he said this not because he cared about the poor, but because he was a thief. And having charge of the money bag, he used to help himself to what was put into it. And Jesus said, "Leave her alone, so that she may keep it for the day of my burial. For the poor you always have with you, but you do not always have me." All right. Devotion versus a fleeting emotion. Let's take a look at this. So the first thing we find, they're reclining at the table, and Mary comes out to wash Jesus' feet. Not unusual at this time. You would have somebody wash your guest's feet, maybe a servant, or often the children might wash the adults' feet, because it wasn't something that the respected person would do. You have somebody else come in and do that for you, if you had that. Now, a lot of times people might wash their own feet, but apparently Jesus' feet, maybe they weren't washed. But we find that Mary had something in mind today. That day, she had planned and she had prepared, because she brought, my version says, a pound of expensive perfume. And we find out just how expensive from Judas. Judas says, why wasn't it sold for 300 denarii? Now, a denarii was about a day's worth of wages. So 300 days worth of wages. We're getting pretty close to a year's worth right there. Now, here in Enid, the average household median income is about $40,000. So if we were to translate into our day's time, we're talking about $35,000 worth of perfume. This was expensive. Okay? And Mary has brought this to dump it on somebody's feet. and clean off dung and dirt and mud. She's planned and she's prepared for it. And then, what does she use to wash with? Does she whip out her rag? What does she use? She uses her hair. Now, she probably had fairly long hair, but that's not my idea of a sanitary, good hygiene environment right there. Oh, what do I have around? I know. Boom. Here we go. I'll use this. Keep it handy with me everywhere I go. Mary was devoted, and we find out that she, more so than any others, was paying attention, knew what was coming for Jesus. She knew what was coming. Because Jesus says, when they get onto her, why wasn't this, why? Save that perfume, let's sell it and we'll give it to the poor, even though it was bad motives. Jesus gets onto them and says, "Oh, be quiet, leave her alone." Because she is planned and she is prepared for something. If you read in the account of Mark, turn to Mark chapter 14. Same account, okay, same thing, just we find a few more details. Mark chapter 14, verse 3. And while he was at Bethany, in the house of Simon the leper, as he was reclining